You're standing on London Bridge at dawn in 1685. Around you, 400,000 people are waking up. That's more than ancient Rome at its height, more than any city in Europe, and you can't see the edges. The smoke from coal fires rises in columns so thick the sun doesn't break through until noon. The Thames beneath you isn't blue, it's brown, moving, alive with boats so dense you could walk across the river by stepping from deck to deck. This isn't the London you think you know. This is something else entirely. Most people imagine medieval London, narrow streets, small, quaint, or they jump ahead to Victorian London, industrial and sprawling. But late 17th century London was neither. It had just survived the plague, just survived the Great Fire. And instead of collapsing, it exploded. The city rebuilt itself in 2 decades and became the largest urban experiment Europe had ever seen. Not because of empire yet. That comes later. This growth happened because of something more fundamental. London had figured out how to keep 500,000 people alive in one place when most cities couldn't sustain 50,000. The bridge you're standing on isn't just a bridge. It's a street. Buildings rise on both sides, 3 and 4 stories tall, leaning over the water. Shops on the ground floor, apartments above. At the center, there's a gap where the buildings pull back, and you can see downriver toward the forest of masts where ships from Virginia and the Indies and the Baltic unload. The bridge has its own chapel, its own economy. People are born here who never leave. And beneath your feet the arches channel the Thames so aggressively that the current roars. Watermen make their living shooting the rapids when the tide is right. Sometimes they miscalculate. Step off the bridge into the city itself and the first thing that hits you is the scale, not height. London doesn't build up much yet. It builds out, street after street after street. You walk east toward Whitechapel and the buildings never stop. You walk west toward Westminster and they keep going. North toward Clerkenwell, same thing. The fire destroyed 80% of the old medieval core, everything from the tower to the temple, and they rebuilt it in brick and stone instead of wood. Wider streets. Regulated construction. But the speed of it meant that planning was loose. Neighborhoods grew organically, following old property lines, bending around old rights-of-way. The result is a maze, and it's loud. What surprised me when I started mapping the soundscape of this period was that it's not horse hooves you'd hear most. It's voices, criers selling everything, watermen shouting for fares, hackney coaches rattling over cobblestones, church bells every 15 minutes from 100 parishes marking time. Hammers from construction sites that never stop because the city is still rebuilding and simultaneously expanding. Dogs everywhere. Pigs in the streets eating garbage. And underneath it all the river, always the river, because the Thames is the city's highway and everything flows along it. Let's talk about food. 400,000 people eat every day. None of them farm. London in the 1680s consumes more grain than some entire countries produce. Where does it come from? The surrounding countryside, yes, but not enough. Grain ships come from East Anglia by sea into the port of London. They unload at wharves downstream and the grain moves into warehouses the size of cathedrals. From there it's distributed to markets. Leadenhall for meat. Billingsgate for fish. Cheapside for everything else. Each market operates on specific days with specific rules enforced by guilds that have existed for centuries. If the distribution system fails for even a week, people starve. And they know it. The city's wealth isn't in palaces yet. It's in warehouses. In the docks stretching for miles downstream. In the insurance offices in Lombard Street where men sit at desks and calculate risk on ships they'll never see carrying cargo to places they'll never go. London's economy in this period is fundamentally about trade. Raw sugar from Barbados, tobacco from Virginia, timber from Norway, spices from Asia through Dutch and English intermediaries. It all comes here, gets processed or repackaged, and gets sent somewhere else. The city is a machine for turning raw materials into money. Water is the thing nobody thinks about until it's explained. 400,000 people need to drink. Where does the water come from? Not the Thames. Not directly. The river is an open sewer downstream of the city and tidal upstream. Drinking river water will kill you. Instead, there's a system. The new river, completed earlier in the century, brings water from Hertfordshire, 20 miles north, through a human-made channel into cisterns in Clerkenwell. From there, it's distributed through wooden pipes to conduits and fountains where people fill buckets. If you're wealthy, you pay for a private pipe to your house. If you're not, you carry water or you buy it from water carriers who fill barrels and sell it by the bucket. The system works until something breaks. Then entire neighborhoods go dry and people make dangerous choices. Move through Cheapside towards St. Paul's and you're walking through the commercial heart of the rebuilt city. St. Paul's Cathedral is still under construction. Christopher Wren's design. It won't be finished for another 20 years, but the scaffolding alone is a landmark. Around it, the new buildings are brick, 3 stories, uniform in a way the old city never was. Shops on the ground floor with large glass windows, still a luxury, displaying goods. The streets are wider now, mandated after the fire, wide enough for 2 carts to pass. It feels open compared to the warrens that still exist in the eastern suburbs. But even here, density is the defining feature. Buildings share walls. Courtyards hide behind facades, packed with smaller structures, workshops, stables. Alleyways branch off every main street, leading into neighborhoods within neighborhoods. The city isn't planned. It's accumulated. Every available space gets used because space is the most valuable commodity. A single room in a building near the exchange might house an entire family. The attic above it houses another. The cellar below is rented as storage or workspace. Multiply that by thousands of buildings, and you start to understand how 400,000 people fit. There's no police force. That won't exist for another 150 years. Instead, there are watchmen, part-time and poorly paid, who patrol at night carrying lanterns and staffs. Their job is mostly to call out the hour and look intimidating. Crime is managed through a patchwork of parish officials, constables elected or appointed reluctantly from local residents, and private prosecution. If you're robbed, you pursue the thief yourself or hire someone to do it. The state doesn't intervene unless it's treason or murder. This works better than you'd think because communities police themselves. Everyone knows everyone on their street. Strangers stand out. Head east into Wapping and Shadwell and you're in a different city. These are the maritime suburbs, technically outside the old city walls, governed by different rules. The docks here are newer, deeper, built for the ships that are getting larger. Warehouses line the river. The population is transient. Sailors between voyages, dock workers, immigrants. Huguenots fleeing France after Louis XIV revoked protections for Protestants. They're settling in Spitalfields, bringing silk weaving skills. The eastern suburbs are where the city grows messiest and fastest because there's less regulation and more opportunity. The river itself is the key to everything. At low tide, you can see the shore muddy and littered with debris. Children scavenge for anything valuable, mudlarks. At high tide, the water rises 10 feet and the shore disappears. The Thames is tidal all the way through London, which means it's also the city's sewer. Everything goes into the river. Waste from houses, runoff from slaughterhouses, industrial waste from tanneries and dye works. The river absorbs it and carries it downstream toward the sea. Except when the tide comes back in, it brings some of it back. No one has connected this to disease yet. That realization is still decades away. Cross the river at Westminster and you're in a different world. Westminster isn't part of London proper. It's a separate city, technically, centered on the Abbey and the Palace. Parliament meets here when it's in session. The law courts are nearby. The area has a more official, less commercial feeling. Fewer shops, more mansions belonging to aristocrats who need to be close to power. The streets are wider and cleaner because there's less industry, but it's still connected to London by the bridge and by the constant traffic of carriages and sedan chairs carrying people between the two cities that function as one. It's easy to forget that this entire system runs without electricity, without engines, without telecommunications. Coordination happens through messengers on foot or horseback. Information travels at the speed of a human body, and yet the city functions. Bread gets baked and distributed every morning. Ships get loaded and unloaded every day. Markets open and close on schedule. Mail gets delivered, carried by post riders to every corner of the country and beyond. The complexity is invisible until you try to imagine organizing it yourself. The population density in some parishes exceeds anything that will exist in London again until the 20th century. St. Giles, a neighborhood west of the Old City, packs 20,000 people into a few dozen acres. Buildings subdivide into smaller and smaller units. Cellars become residences, attics become workshops, courtyards fill with temporary structures. The fire regulations don't apply here because this area didn't burn. It's still medieval in layout, timber construction, narrow streets that don't let light in. Disease spreads easily. Fires start regularly. But people live here because rent is cheap and work is nearby. Here's the scale shock moment. London in the 1680s is consuming 5,000 tons of coal every week. It comes by ship from Newcastle, a 300-mile journey down the coast. The coal trade is so important that it has its own regulations, its own fleet, its own insurance market. 5,000 tons a week means multiple ships arriving every single day, unloading at specific wharves, distributing coal to dealers who sell it to households and businesses. And this is just coal. Add grain shipments, timber, bricks, livestock being driven in from the countryside, fish from the coast, imported goods from overseas, and the logistical operation required to keep the city alive is staggering. No central planning, no computers. Just networks of merchants and traders and guild officials who know their piece of the system and trust that everyone else knows theirs. Move north toward Holborn and you're climbing out of the river valley. The streets rise. The air clears slightly. This is where the legal profession clusters around the Inns of Court. Lincoln's Inn, Gray's Inn. These are self-contained communities, part university, part guild, part residence. Young men study law here, live here, eventually practice here. The inns have their own chapels, their own dining halls, their own gardens. They're islands of quiet in a loud city, and they produce the lawyers and officials who keep the entire legal and commercial system running. Further north, the city starts to fade into fields. But even here, development is spreading. Clerkenwell, Islington, villages that are becoming suburbs. The city doesn't have hard edges anymore. It bleeds into the countryside, and the line between urban and rural is increasingly unclear. Farmers grow vegetables specifically for the London market. Dairies supply milk. Brick kilns operate at the city's periphery, turning clay into the building material that's reconstructing the core. The city has created its own ecosystem that extends miles beyond its formal boundaries. What holds all of this together isn't government. The city has a lord mayor and aldermen and a complex medieval governance structure, but their power is limited. What holds it together is self-interest and mutual dependence. Merchants need stable customers. Workers need reliable employers. Landlords need tenants who pay rent. Guilds need apprentices who become masters. Everyone is embedded in networks of obligation and reciprocity. Break those networks and you're on your own, so people maintain them, not out of virtue, out of necessity. By the 1680s, London has also become the intellectual center of the country. The Royal Society meets here, bringing together the men who are inventing modern science. Isaac Newton, Robert Hooke. Christopher Wren is a member. They're conducting experiments, publishing findings, corresponding with scholars across Europe. Coffee houses are everywhere, and they function as informal information exchanges. You can walk into a coffee house in Cornhill and hear news from Amsterdam and Paris that arrived that morning. Different coffee houses specialize in different topics: marine insurance, stock trading, politics, science. The city is generating and distributing knowledge at a speed that didn't exist a generation earlier. There's no street lighting except what individual businesses or residents provide. Lanterns hung outside doors. Link boys carrying torches for hire. After dark, the city becomes dangerous and disorienting. Streets that are crowded at midday empty out. The watchmen call the hours. Taverns stay open, islands of light and noise. But most people stay home unless they have no choice. The city has a completely different character at night. Smaller, more fragmented. And in winter, when darkness comes at 4 in the afternoon, the night city lasts 16 hours. Stand at the top of the monument, the column built to commemorate the Great Fire, and you can see the whole thing spread out. Smoke rising from thousands of chimneys. The river cutting through the middle, packed with ships and boats. Church spires marking parishes. The unfinished dome of St. Paul's dominating the skyline. And beyond it all, the city just keeps going, fading into haze, dissolving into the countryside, but never fully stopping. 400,000 people living on top of each other, depending on systems they mostly don't see, sustained by trade routes that stretch across oceans, governed by customs and agreements that no one wrote down but everyone understands. And the strange thing is that it grows. Every year, more people arrive than die. The city should be a death trap. Disease is constant. Sanitation is primitive. Industrial work is dangerous. But people keep coming because London offers something villages and towns don't. Opportunity, anonymity, the chance to reinvent yourself. And the city keeps absorbing them, finding space, adjusting, expanding. It's not planned. It's not even particularly well managed, but it works. You're back on the bridge now. The sun is setting. The boats on the river are heading to anchorage for the night. Lamps are being lit in the buildings that line the bridge. Below, the tide is turning, pulling water back toward the sea, carrying the day's waste with it. Tomorrow it will reverse. The ships will unload. The markets will open. The coal will arrive. The bread will be baked. And 400,000 people will wake up and do it all again. The machine keeps running, and no one's entirely sure why it doesn't collapse.